Hello, everyone. I'm Phyllis Yaffe. I'm the Consul General of Canada here in New York. It's really, really good to bring a fan club to these things. I'm going to do it more often. It is spectacular to have a full house tonight for the Walrus Talks. We are thrilled to have them here. This is the first international event for the Walrus. And of course, we are always thrilled to bring a crowd together to join us in our brand new chancery, which we moved into last November with our colleagues from the delegation to the UN. Who share this wonderful space with us. We're so proud of it. We are so proud to showcase the talent, the creativity, and the artistic endeavors of our colleagues from around Canada, and you will see them all over the walls. I hope you saw them as you were gathering outside. We share this space with our colleagues from the United Nations. I do want to just introduce our ambassador to the United Nations, Marc-André Blanchard. We are also blessed to have him. And if you can vote for the UN Security Council, speak to him after. I hope you saw the lighting in the foyer, we call it the Flora McDonald space. This is the Ken and Pat Taylor room. We chose to name each of our meeting spaces in honor of a great Canadian hero. And I'm sure most of you remember Ken Taylor, who was our ambassador in Iran, and the famous Our Man in Tehran story when he helped Americans hide and then leave happily to safety here in the United States. But and then he asked for the dream job. The government of Canada said, "What would you like to do, Ken?" And he said, "I want to be the Consul General in New York." So he joined this organization and became a wonderful Consul General. And those of us who have followed in his footsteps are honored to share this title with such a great hero. I hope when you walk around, you see the creativity of the Canadians who endeavored to make this space the way it is. I always want to just take a second to say the people who created this, designed it, built it, and thought carefully about how to use this space were the people employed by the Government of Canada who did this for us. And so I always just like to say, sometimes the government gets everything right, and in this space, they did. You know, the artwork is a combination of peoples from all over the country. Much of it is Indigenous people's art, and we're very proud of that. We hope that it inspires people to think about the role the Indigenous people play in our country and the opportunity we strive for in our country to be inclusive, to give everybody an opportunity to share in the potential that Canada and the rest of the world has to offer them with dignity and with understanding. So we are extremely proud of our art collection, and some of us can actually explain it to you. We also want to just celebrate, as we will with the Walrus, that this is the 100th anniversary of Canada having an office here in New York. In 1919, the government sent Lieutenant Colonel John Cooper to open what they called the Canadian Bureau of Information. I mean, perfect, right? But it was in Times Square. And it was a little office, and it has, of course, grown to be what you see here today. But we've been here bringing together our two countries for just over 100 years. And for us, really the task at hand, and has been for all my colleagues in the Consulate General, is to continue to grow the relationship between Canada and the U.S. We never take for granted this relationship. It is the strongest and the most important one I think our country has, and we hope America has, but it should never be taken for granted. We trade about $2 billion in goods and services every single day between these two countries. So we know that it's important to us. We know it's important to America. We know it's important to the security of the world. And so we work hard to continue that relationship the way that it has prospered and served both Americans and Canadians. We are hard at work, always coming up with great ideas, but we are so privileged to be able to work with the Walrus, who are the voice of great ideas in Canada. So thank you very much for bringing your great ideas to us here in New York. We are honored to have with us Catherine Loubier, who is the Déléguée Générale de Québec, and who will bring some remarks from Concordia University, our sponsor. Please, Catherine.
Bonsoir tout le monde. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Consul General. I'm thrilled to be here tonight, especially because we have experts from Concordia University, university that contributes greatly to Quebec vibrancy, economic growth, and culture. And of course, Quebec and New York have a long history as well. It's 80 years next year of the presence of Quebec in New York, right here at the Rockefeller Plaza. And so we're still there after 79 years. And when the office opened, it was all about steel and trade and Christmas trees and maple syrup. And it's a little bit about that still today. And I think that Phyllis said it, it couldn't be more right, and I keep repeating this, we can't take this relationship for granted. Quebec exports $92 billion to the world, $64 billion of that in the US, and $8.1 billion right here in New York. This is the first client of Quebec. So we need the trade with New York to ensure our prosperity. The time of uncertainty that we live right now with some clouds in the front window, but as well a lot of changes to our trade rules. It's sort of brought us closer on the ground. We've been re-engaging with our partners. We've been explaining again why it's so important to trade and to continue to fuel this supply chain together and create jobs on both sides of the border. And so one of the things that Quebec is positioning, and I think it's so important, these talks, because it's important to talk about why we are integrated, and to the young generation as well, the millennials, who sometimes don't understand the importance of our relationship. One of the things we are positioning is how green Quebec is. And so definitely we've been pursuing selling more clean, reliable, stable hydroelectricity to our friends here in New York. And we're also engaged in diversifying the supply chain of the US with regards to critical minerals, those minerals that go in everything we will build for the economy of tomorrow, cell phones, green automobile, and so on. And so it's my duty, and I feel sort of an urgency to be out there, continuing to engage as we have done for so long. And I think we can definitely together also decarbonize and be a partner for decarbonization right here in New York and in the Northeast. So thank you again for the invitation in this wonderful place. I like Rockefeller Plaza, but I have to say when I come here with the art and everything you've done, it's quite wonderful. And it's a great setting for talks. And so without further ado, I will invite Shelley Ambrose, Executive Director of the Walrus, to the stage.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Consul General Yaffe. I don't know if you noticed Phyllis's dress. Phyllis, show them your dress. It is the skyline of New York with the Brooklyn Bridge. Who does not want that dress? She won't even tell me where she bought it. It's really mean. I am Shelley Ambrose, the Executive Director of the Walrus. We are thrilled to be here at the consulate. I actually used to work at the consulate in New York, but it didn't look like this. It was at Rockefeller, probably looks like your office now. And we're thrilled to be here to celebrate the 100th anniversary of Canada's presence in New York. There's obviously a rich history of conversation between our two countries. Sometimes it's a quiet conversation, sometimes it's not such a quiet conversation, but we need to have that conversation on all kinds of levels. This is the first time the Walrus Talks has traveled outside of Canada. Within Canada, we have produced 111 evenings like this from coast to coast to coast, and we have had over 800 Walrus Talkers. So it's always the same format. This little thing called the Walrus started 16 years ago. One of my friends who's here tonight said, I thought it was 100 years old. No, 16 years ago, it's still a startup. And we recognize at the Walrus that Canada's conversation is complex and necessary. And so that conversation takes many forms at the Walrus. In print, fact-based journalism, we have actual live human fact checkers. So everybody in news and journalism now says, we're in the fact business. We're not. We're in the fact checking business, which is very important and makes us special. You'll all get a copy of the magazine on your way out, or you can, of course, read a lot more journalism on your phone at thewalrus.ca. We also do a lot of conversation in rooms like this. And no matter how you consume the Walrus or where you consume it, our commitment is to be independent and to bring together interesting and interested people who care about the issues that matter. And that is every one of you, because by being here, you are now Walry, which is an unfact-checkable word. We're allowed one a year, Walry. It doesn't exist, but it is a word that we use for you. So to this end, thank you for coming out to play with us tonight. We have a lot of special guests tonight, so I'm not naming any of you, except I would like to point out the chair of the Walrus Board of Directors, Helen Burston, who has come down from Toronto for this, and other Walrus board members who are here, Diane Blake, Gillian Smith, Zara El-Harazzi, Alyssa Hussein, and our member of the Walrus Trust. That means a really big donor, Kim Samuel, and another big donor to the Walrus, Edward Bertinsky. Welcome, all of you. There's no way we can do the work we do without our partners, and one of our strongest and longest partnerships is with the folks at Concordia University. I think we have some Concordia alumni with us tonight. Where are you? Welcome, Concordia alumni living in New York. You'll hear a lot more about Concordia's work tonight from the Concordians, and you'll soon understand why our partnership is so important. Their work as a next-generation university shows their commitment to narrative, dialogue, innovation. It's all very integral to these conversations that we have. I think this is our 14th Walrus Talks with Concordia, and we're always choosing different themes, and it's really fun. So I want to thank President Graham Carr, who you'll hear from at the end of the evening, from Concordia, who's with us tonight, and Joanne and the rest of our colleagues from Concordia for bringing us to New York for our first time. So here's how the Walrus Talks works. As I said, they're all the same except for the topic. There are 7 talkers. Each talker has 7 minutes each. They know this. Each will come up and introduce themselves. We leave the lights on, so you keep that program in your hand. The front is in speaker order. If you would like to know more about them, flip it over, and you can read their bios. I do not pop up like a jack-in-the-box in between each of them and read to you. We know you can follow along. They will introduce themselves. You will hear 7 talkers in a row. There is one slight change tonight in that our 2 last talkers, are married to each other, the Heymans, and they wrote a book together, so they're going to share the stage together. So 7 talkers, but 6 than them. It's the night for married people. We have 2 married couples on the stage tonight, but only one will do it together. You will hear them all in a row, and then when your head's all full of new ideas, you will join us outside in that lovely reception space for wine and chatter. So just before I let them go, I would like to thank each in advance. So thank you to Rebecca Duclos. She's Dean of the Faculty of Fine Arts at Concordia. Thank you to Jennifer McGrath, Perform Center Chair in Childhood Preventative Health and Data Science and Associate Professor of Psychology at Concordia. Thank you to Clive Thompson, Science and Technology Journalist and a Canadian New Yorker. Thank you to Ola Icar, Canadian Excellence Research Chair in Smart, Sustainable, and Resilient Communities and Cities at Concordia. And thank you to Emily Nussbaum, television critic at The New Yorker and honorary Canadian married to the Canadian Clive Thompson, who will speak before her, but not with her. Bruce Heyman, former United States Ambassador to Canada, who was appointed by President Obama and served in Ottawa from 2014 to 2017, along with his own secret weapon, Vicky Heyman, co-founder of Uncharted LLC and co-authors of The Art of Diplomacy, Strengthening the Can-US Relationship in Times of Uncertainty. We miss you two in Ottawa so much. They are also frequent attendees to the Walrus Talks when they lived in Canada. Thank you all for coming. Let us begin.
Good evening, everyone. Bonsoir. I'm Rebecca, and I never thought I'd hear myself say this, but the other day, I got the funniest letter from the CIA. Dear Professor Duclos, this is a final response to your request for records pertaining to Dr. Shaw Livermore. We did not locate any responsive records that would reveal an openly acknowledged CIA affiliation with the subject. To the extent that your request also seeks records, if any exist, that would reveal an unacknowledged or classified affiliation with the subject of your request, we can neither confirm nor deny the existence or non-existence of such records. You may consider this finding a denial of this portion of your request. Well, that was hardly neighborly, was it? The subject of my request was my maternal grandfather, Shaw Livermore. The letter came faster than I would have imagined, arriving unceremoniously in this bland envelope. Miss Rosie Monroe doesn't even get a CIA seal on her little sticker. No agency seal, but this was clearly a letter not to be tampered with. I stared at that slab of security tape for some time, and I thought, my neighbors have suddenly drawn the blinds, and I want to know why. But let me back up a bit. It's my grandfather, Shaw Livermore. By the time I was born in the late 1960s, he was a retired dean at the University of Arizona. A longtime New Englander, he would make his way back to our island cottage in Maine in the summers. My memories of him there include a lot of lobster and steamers and bear hugs before bedtime, and late nights with my mother, his beloved daughter. After my mom died, and long after he'd passed, I found an old CV of his from 1957. A history colleague listened patiently as I recounted some of the mysterious acronyms that I found in Shaw's resume. Staff member of the WPB, ECA Director of Programs Division, Paris, research staff member at RAND, Planning Board of the ODM at the NSC, White House Consultant, WOC, Visiting Scholar, AUB, OEP Consular Attaché. My colleague looked at me and she said, the only acronym you haven't said yet is CIA. Not a chance, I said. My grandfather's the most ethical adult I've ever met. Exactly, winked my friend. So I've spent months now decoding those acronyms, trying to piece together what I now realize is a classic Cold War CV. So here's what I found. Let's do it again. War Production Board, Economic Cooperation Administration, otherwise known as the Marshall Plan, Research and Development Corporation, Office of Defense Mobilization, National Security Council, Consultant Without Compensation, love that one, American University, Beirut, Office of Emergency Preparedness, that just happened to be in Thailand. After I found that one out, my baby cup sent from Bangkok in 1967 took on a whole new meaning. I've had a lot of help along the way. Hours spent in the OSS and CIA electronic reading rooms, obituaries from the Post and the Times, online searches through the National Archives, and of course the Truman Library, where archivist Sam Rouché's genteel Southern accent would greet me on the phone whenever I called. I've assembled charts, maps, timelines, and piles of declassified memos, and for the first time in years, waited for Canada Post to deliver real mail. But just when I thought I'd closed a loop or could prove a connection, something else would come up. Some new lead or some dead end. It's as if the closer I tried to get to Shaw, the more elusive he'd become. And while it's thrilling, but just a little strange, to hold in my hands papers directly connecting my grandfather and the likes of Link Gordon, Avril Harriman, Richard Bissell, and Nelson Rockefeller, what grabs me most are the cracks within these official sources, where the tiny details are, the ones that give me little glimpses into his life. For example, here's a prep memo for the Geneva Summit in 1955. Shaw is on the recipient list in the White House Annex. I love his wacky John Malkovich office number of 234 and a half. Or this memo from Nelson Rockefeller. He can't make it to a national security briefing, and so he wants to send my grandfather. Someone's written no clearance in the margin. But I guess Nelson got that fixed pretty quickly. Or there's this little gem from the White House to Central Intelligence. I still don't know what role Shaw might have played on the Quantico panel. But lucky him, when the real work was happening, I found out that key lime pie, his favorite, was on the dessert menu that night. By now, it's pretty clear that Grandpa Shaw was working with figures who had or would later have what the CIA calls an openly acknowledged affiliation. But does that make him CIA too? And if he was, does that make me feel any differently about him? I found this photo recently. Paris, 1951, with my grandmother during the Marshall Plan years. Shaw has become my unwitting guide to aspects of a Cold War that I know so little about, but that consumed his life so intimately. It's been odd uncovering this spotty trail of evidence, showing parts of my grandfather's life while concealing others. It's one thing to find his papers amongst my mom's things, but it's another thing entirely to locate him within the American historical record. Recently, my friend Darian and I were talking about secret identities. There's something we're all curious about in our family histories. But, she said, unlike many of our ancestors, your grandfather seems to be hidden in plain sight. And of course, she's right. There he is, and there he's not. So, what of that perplexing response from Washington? If they'll neither confirm nor deny the existence or non-existence of certain affiliations, I guess that leaves my grandfather's identity open to me. The CIA knows something, but they're saying nothing. They're neither lying nor truth-telling. And strangely, that might be the most neighborly gesture anyone could ask for.
I'm Jennifer McGrath. How well do you know your neighbors, and how well do they know you? My research focuses on how neighborhoods influence health. One of the earliest stories linking neighborhood and health began a short distance from here on the other side of the East River. In the summer of 1809, Brooklyn was experiencing a deadly outbreak of yellow fever. And the medical thinking at the time was that vapors or bad air was causing the disease. Politics were present back then too. And because there were virtually no cases of disease in Manhattan, several were attempting to pin the blame on Brooklyn and saying it had more filth compared to all the other neighborhoods of New York City. The Concordia was a foreign ship that had arrived from Havana, and it was docked at a wharf in Brooklyn. And 2 doctors documented that the contagion spread from that ship, and yellow fever was exclusively confined within a circle about 200 yards away from the ship. And they convinced the Board of Health to dispel the theory about bad air and filth. The Concordia played a foundational role in our early understanding of places, health, and infectious disease. Now, not long afterward, across the Atlantic in London, many people were becoming ill with cholera. And again, they blamed vapors or bad air. And they were trying to figure out where these vapors were escaping from the ground. And John Snow was an early medical geographer, and he plotted deaths on a map, which led to pinpointing Broad Street Water Pump as the source of the cholera epidemic. So importantly, these pioneering work of these medical geographers really reoriented the discussion about the health of individuals to the role of the neighborhood and how the neighborhood played a role in individuals' health. Today, we're really fortunate to have vaccines that target yellow fever, they target cholera, as well as many other contagious infectious diseases. However, stark disparities persist in health across different neighborhoods. One key culprit is poverty. And why do poorer neighborhoods continue to have poorer health? Neighborhoods that are economically disadvantaged have spatially concentrated poverty, residential instability, and social disorder, such as crime and violence. And these introduce chronic stressors at the neighborhood level. If you're living in a disadvantaged neighborhood with high poverty or high crime, you're at increased risk for unemployment, dropping out of school, obesity, heart disease, serious mental illness, suicide, and premature mortality, among others. There are some important distinctions, though, that can be learned by comparing the 5 largest cities in Canada and the US. In Canada, low-income neighborhoods are not characterized by segregation of visible minorities, and people are exposed to much lower concentrated poverty and violent crime. So an obvious question that arises is whether the variation of health across neighborhoods is due to the neighborhood environment itself. And one critique is that neighborhood variation may be attributable to non-random sorting of individuals. So what does this mean? It means that there's selection bias because people choose the neighborhoods that they live in. And people at risk for poorer health probably face limited housing options and might be more likely, therefore, to live in poorer neighborhoods. So as scientists, we love random assignment because it isolates causation from correlation. So imagine if we could randomly assign individuals to live in neighborhoods to disentangle the effects of neighborhood disadvantage. Well, in the mid-90s, the US Department of Housing and Urban Development did just that. Moving to Opportunity was a social experiment that randomly gave over 4,000 families living in public housing developments in extremely poor communities the chance to move to neighborhoods with less poverty. So families were randomly assigned to 3 different groups. An experimental group received a housing voucher and assistance to relocate to a neighborhood that had less than 10% poverty. Another group was provided with a housing voucher to relocate, but they weren't given any assistance or guidance of where to relocate to. And then there was a control group that had no voucher and no assistant. For the families that opted to move, the adults had improved mental health, lower depression, lower psychological distress, and several better health outcomes, including less obesity, diabetes, and physical limitations. But the findings of the experiment weren't actually as dramatic as what they had anticipated. And in fact, there were some disadvantages found, particularly for adolescents, because moving seemed to disrupt their social networks. So the Moving to Opportunity study led scientists to recognize that neighborhood effects on health go beyond poverty and disadvantage. So rather, there are specific area characteristics or contextual effects and resources that can influence health and behaviors. So the characteristics of one's neighborhood or their built environment can make certain lifestyle decisions more viable than others. So examples can include the density of fast food, your distance of what it takes to access healthy food, poor air quality, traffic congestion, noise levels, and just as bad habits can be promoted through neighborhood factors, so too can good habits. So green space, walkability, access to public parks and activity spaces, biking lanes, and reduced noise levels can all promote health and counteract the negative impact of chronic stressors in the neighborhood. Hundreds of studies have linked neighborhood area characteristics to anxiety, depression, substance use, partner violence, cardiovascular disease, obesity, and decreased physical activity. Now, you can imagine that if you're living next to, say, a busy highway like the Major Deegan, if you're adjacent to a subway station, Times Square, Grand Central, or if you're under the flight path of LaGuardia or some other major airport, that could probably disrupt your sleeping habits. My research examines the effects of neighborhood on sleep. And many of you are familiar with wearable devices like Fitbits and the Apple Watch. And we ask families to go to bed wearing a portable device to capture their brainwave activity while they're sleeping. And we find that parents and children who live in neighborhoods with greater noise, crime, and traffic congestion have poorer sleep, even if they say they got a good night's sleep. And specifically, they have more irregular sleep with greater disruptions or microarousals while they're sleeping. Now, a curious finding has been that the neighborhood disorder doesn't actually seem to affect all people equally. Instead, family members who report more stress and ruminating about their neighborhood have worse sleep compared to those that feel safe in their neighborhoods. In other words, the perception of one's neighborhood has a protective buffer against the effect of neighborhood disorder on sleep. And this highlights an important paradigm shift to the idea of social connectedness that we experience within our neighborhood and with our neighbors. The social connectedness or social cohesion refers to neighbors feeling a sense of belonging to their community, that people can be trusted, and that they have attachment to and like living in their neighborhood. And there's also a sense of collective responsibility, that neighbors watch out for one another, that they have a shared willingness to intervene for the common good. Social cohesion is linked to increased well-being, lower social isolation, and enhanced social ties among neighbors. I used to work down the street at Bellevue's psychiatric emergency room, and I was always struck by how many patients would refuse to go to shelters, but instead opt to go back to their homeless communities because that was where their family and friends were. Even in the Moving to Opportunity study, the experiment where people were paid to move to better neighborhoods, only about 50% of the people chose to move. And these examples underscore the importance of human connectedness and belonging. Social connectedness seems to matter over and above the neighborhood characteristics. In other words, having a strong sense of social cohesion in your neighborhood seems to provide a protective effect against the crime, the noise, and the lack of resources. Feeling connected with your neighborhood and your neighbors is thought to be the social glue of community problem solving and change making. The behavior of neighbors strongly influences and spreads to others through social contagion. And health is not simply the consequence that neighborhoods have on people, but the reciprocal effect that people have on neighborhoods. How well do you know your neighbors? Your health has much to do with this question. Thank you.
Hey there, I'm Clive Thompson, and I moved to New York from Toronto in 1990. I'd been here for 20 years. So tonight I'm really talking about what it's like to live in my new neighborhood. Just show of hands, how many of you are Canadians living in New York City? All right, about half of them. Okay, great. So there's a series of somewhat disconnected observations, some of which you may respond with. The first one is, one of the things I learned quickly was the words that I cannot say in the United States because no one will understand what I'm saying. Serviette, Chesterfield, hydro, as in, oh my God, the hydro is off, and in a restaurant, bring me the bill. I was discussing with some friends at a bar, and I realized I could compose a sentence that was made out of English words that no one in the US could understand. And I think it was, could you bring me the hydro bill? I left it on the Chesterfield next to the serviette. Now, being Canadian was, I think, actually a weird advantage when I was trying to penetrate the world of media here in New York City. People seemed to, respond well to me. And I would mention this to a friend of mine who ran a .com back in the 90s. And he said, well, that makes sense. Everyone likes Canadians down here. We're like dolphins. And I said, dolphins? And he goes, well, yeah, we're regarded as smart and no one's afraid of us. So for some reason, foreigners visiting New York City, I think they detect I'm Canadian because they will come and ask for directions in French when I'm in Midtown. Like literally, a stranger will come and grab my arm and ask me in French how to get to the Empire State Building. I have the worst French imaginable, right? Like it's like Ontario high school French. If I spoke it like out loud when I was in Paris or something, it would permanently corrode diplomatic relations between the two countries. But I know it well enough to help these people out. So I hash my way through because I'm friendly and they're not afraid of me. My finest moment was when I helped a French woman order a sandwich in a restaurant. When I visited the US, I noticed one thing right away, which is what they sell booze everywhere. Right? When you grow up in Canada, in the 70s, I had to go with my dad to the Ontario Liquor Control Board, which is one of these brutalist Soviet buildings. And you couldn't even look at the alcohol beforehand. Like he filled out a little white form. And they would bring this bag of Crown Royal rye whiskey out to him in its little bag. It was like a transaction where he was buying plutonium or something like that. In the US, you could buy booze anywhere, right? Like in the corner store, at the pizza joint, while I was waiting for my Amtrak train, and they would sell it to you a single can at a time, and then hand over like a little paper bag so you could conceal it and drink it illegally in public. Of course, said one of my Canadian friends who'd come a few years before me, he's going, this is the meaning of American freedom, right? So when I immigrated on November 1st, 1998, that's the first thing I did. It was a Sunday when you can't get beer anywhere in Ontario. And I went to the corner store, and I got a beer, and I put it in my bag, and I drank it, sitting on the stoop of a nearby house. It was a taste of freedom. Now, one of the problems, as you may have discovered being a Canadian in New York City, is that people assume you know every other Canadian in Canada. So I'd meet someone at a party, and they'd say, oh, you're from Canada. I met a Canadian once. Do you know Dominic in Calgary? Now, this had happened to me enough that I was getting kind of pissed off, and I'd get annoyed, and I'd launch into like a rant, really, about how Canada was a huge and diverse country of 37 million people, and we were just sick of Americans assuming it was all one tiny, quaint little village. We're all, wearing toques and living in snow forts, and this sort of American solipsistic narcissism, cultural imperialism is exactly why everyone around the planet hates Americans. And after I've done that rant, they'd go, okay, but do you know Dominic in Calgary? And I'd be like, yeah, actually I do. I know. I met him at U of T. Let's talk about the word y'all. About 7 years ago, I started playing in a country bluegrass band based in Brooklyn. I'm from suburban North York, so I have no business doing this. It's like the least country place on the planet. But, a few of my bandmates are actually from the American South. They're from Tennessee, North Carolina, Virginia. And so they're constantly, using y'all, like they'll say to the band, so, are y'all coming out to rehearsal? Y'all coming for a drink? Can I get y'all a drink? And I've started realizing, my God, that's an amazing formulation. I love y'all. It's gender neutral. It's inclusive. It's super inviting. Hey, y'all. So I've started using it, actually. And since I became an American now, I feel like I'm allowed to use it. And I'm trying to figure out a way to integrate this into Canadian culture, because I think this is the one sort of cultural transport that would actually improve the Canadian lexicon, y'all. After 20 years of living here, I decided to become a citizen just last fall. I had an American wife, 2 American kids, an American dog. And I thought, okay, I'm not leaving, so let's do this thing. And I studied for the quiz, and I did the interview. And this very nice young man quizzed me. I got the questions right. And then he sort of asked these free-form questions. It was more like, so why do you want to come here permanently? And I'm like, well, you know, it's great. I love it here. And he's like, you love the United States? I'm like, yes, the U.S. has been very good to me. I literally said the U.S. has been very good to me. It was like the most cliched immigrant thing you could possibly say, and that's what I popped off at that moment. But it was true. I mean, I really have loved living here. Like, I think maybe that's some of it's because I live in New York City, which is like the Canada of the U.S. In fact, I live in Brooklyn, which is like the Canada of New York City. But, you know, I admire a lot of the U.S.'s, like, you know, stated ideals. I like their gumption. I like the fact that they really like newcomers, certainly around here. You know, whatever else is happening in the rest of the country, New York and Brooklyn are fantastic, you know, melting pots of immigrants from all over the place. You know, so I arrived at 8 a.m. to be sworn in at the massive courthouse downtown Brooklyn. I said hello to all my fellow about-to-be Americans. There was 350 of them. The woman to my left was Ukrainian. To the right was a young man from Jamaica who knew the word Chesterfield. Very exciting. The whole process, though, it took like 4 hours because they had to go over everyone's paperwork in this unbelievably ponderous way. And the final swearing in is like 5 minutes at the end, right? So everyone was ravenous, and we had to go to the bathroom, and we all like took our new certificates and just fled to go get food anywhere. The only place nearby in this part of Brooklyn was an absolutely terrible Mexican restaurant chain across the street. But that was fine. That's what I needed. I raced over, told them all I was an American, and ordered Mexican food served by the local teenagers, which was just about the most American thing I could do. It's good to be here with y'all. Thank you very much.
Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Ola Icar, and I'm going to talk about next generation cities. So what does that mean? I mean, cities that are truly sustainable, inclusive, accessible. I mean, I'm just a physicist, so what does a physicist know about sustainability and inclusive cities? I mean, I mainly work on energy. So when I look at cities, obviously, as everybody, I see the buildings, the cars, the people. But I sort of try to figure out, how does it all work? I mean, how does the energy supply the room? Does the aircon work? Is it too cold here? I mean, how did you get here? Did you use public transport? Or how does the technology work behind what we see in a city? So energy is obviously not all. We heard that before. I mean, it's about cities, connectiveness, neighborhoods that are just made out of sort of LEED certified buildings, highly efficient, but nobody can afford to live there, is probably not what we want. And then you heard the title of my chair, this sort of smart thing in the smart cities. I mean, that sort of seems to signal the future and seems to be very intelligent. But what does it really mean? I mean, mostly it's tech-driven. It's mainly the big companies who drive smart cities. And mostly they mean do something intelligent like a street light. You approach a street lamp, it switches on. Great. I mean, if you leave, it's getting dark. So that might be a nice idea. Or you have the best routing apps on your phone and you find the best parking place, or you move faster than you would normally do. But is that really what we understand under a truly sustainable and next generation city? So all these sort of innovations obviously help in efficiency terms, but they don't really change the causes and the real problems that we have. I mean, we still will have pollution, congestion, high energy costs, because even if we are as efficient as we want, I mean, the energy system is still based on fossil fuels, apart from when you get hydro from Quebec, obviously. That would be a real game changer here. You would still have public spaces that nobody wanted to use, pretty sterile, no place to sit. And again, I mean, all these sort of efficient buildings would not mean that people could afford to live there or even would like to live there. So I think if we talk about smart, we need to talk about much more than just efficiency. That's why we came up with the expression of next generation cities, because it means you should really think about the people that make the cities and not just the smart solutions. So what does it really mean, a truly next generation city? There are several components. For me, as a physicist and energy engineer, it's obviously all about renewable energies. So we need to go fossil free. We need to decarbonize our cities. And that doesn't come by itself. I mean, it means a lot of investment. It's a lot of money. And everybody would do it if it were cheap and sort of with fast amortization. And that's not what we can expect. I mean, if we leave it up to industry who expect return on investments in 2 to 3 years, it won't work. So we need other solutions to make it happen. Then the mobility thing. I mean, even the smartest autonomous solar electric cars don't resolve the problem of congestion. It might make our environment cleaner, but it doesn't change things fundamentally. And then the thing about autonomous cars, I mean, you could pack them even closer because they don't need so much distance. But I mean, if you don't want to steer, why don't you just move into a public bus or use public transport? So it seems a bit odd that we don't go to the real causes. I mean, we are humans, we are two-legged animals, we could walk. I mean, we once walked, you said it would improve our health. It would, I mean, you could, if you don't like to walk, you could cycle at least. So that would also clear the spaces, the public spaces that we have, make them much more attractive, much easier to use. And so it's all about getting rid of our individual cars. I think that's one of the main issues. It's not easy because people like to drive, they like to drive fast, but if you're stuck in a traffic jam, that doesn't really help you very much. So the last topic I would say to make it really happen is to change the policy framework, because we need to get back into control of housing. We can have the most lovely smart city, but if nobody can afford to live, and I guess New York is a pretty good example for this, it doesn't really bring us any further to have a mixed neighborhood that we want. So what would be the nice, futuristic, next generation city look like? I mean, it should be not just about technology. It should include the arts. It should include urban design and science in a much more human way. And we should rather think of the spaces that we could get if we would get rid of cars. I mean, much more public space to be used for shops, backyard activities, urban green, even water in the city where you can maybe fish again or do something that you enjoy to do. So to get there, we would really need to do much more than just looking at smart technologies. It's getting to understand how all the parts fits together, energy, urban design, the human ecosystem, and how people can communicate in livable and lively spaces. So that's what we do at Concordia. I start to lead a pretty multidisciplinary team there of engineers, but also philosopher and biologist and a design professor. So we really try to bring these very different elements together that we need to make a next generation city happening. Also working with some colleagues and friends here in New York on a case study in Govanus. Also a very ambitious project around the canal cleanup. So where hopefully a net zero or even positive energy neighborhood will appear. It's not an obvious process. There's a lot of money involved as well, but many engaged people here and communities are working on it, and I very much hope that we can get some results in the next couple of years. So if we don't do that, if we don't seriously decarbonize our energy system and improve our cities, what happens? I mean, for us, it will be probably not so dramatic, the effects, but in the developing countries, it would mean 2 billion people would not even have access to drinking water anymore. So I think we should also see the global picture in this pretty essential question for humankind. Are we ready to do it? Are we going renewable 100%, not just by buying hydro from Canada, but doing it here locally, because that would also protect us and make our communities much more resilient? And is everybody willing to support their own neighborhood? Very much in your sense, connecting with your neighbors, making it more inclusive, biodiverse, and sharing not just your car, but other objects that today consume our resources. So, next generation cities, I think at Concordia we can deliver the strategies and the data, but the rest is really up to you, the citizens. Thank you.
Sorry, I have to open all my apps. Set the timer. I'm Emily Nussbaum. I married a dolphin. And I have to be honest, this is less of any kind of argument or statement on neighborliness and more just a list of things I've noticed, which I'll call, in the name of Susan Sontag, Notes on Canada. Milk in bags. Butter tarts. An exotic muffin, I gather, that Clive has consistently described to me as disgusting and full of raisins as soft as mashed up flies. I've never eaten one, so I can't confirm. I know this is insulting. However, Swiss chalet is apparently the food that he admires more than any other in the world. It's not bad, I tried it. This is the inverse of Clive's speech, so I will note that if you want to get a simple beer, you apparently have to ask the government to sell it to you. On the plus side, when my son had a high fever when we were visiting over Christmas, it cost $25 to treat. As you can tell, some of this list is about Canada, but a lot of it has been determined by my highly specific proximity to a single Canadian, Clive Thompson. And when you learn about a country through the lens of the person that you married, it is a fairly specific version of the country. Therefore, my Canada is dominated in a way that other people's is not by Northrop Frye, the poets Al Purdy and Bill Bissett, and various obscure political controversies from the University of Toronto journalism scene in the late 1980s. It's a Canada in which hockey does not exist. At a pub trivia contest that I attended near Bracebridge, Ontario, I went blank on numerous subjects. It was as though I had had a stroke. It was like so many of the topics were completely out of my ability level, particularly the details of a children's show called The Littlest Hobo, which was something that everyone else oohed and awed about and seemed very nostalgic. It's strange to be in a place where people are nostalgic about things that you've never heard of. I was extremely shocked when I realized that the Queen was on Canadian currency. Honestly, I still can't get over the idea that what I had always thought of as our much more chill, more progressive, less authoritarian neighbor had a queen. The truth is, my primary knowledge of Canada before I started going there with Clive was, like most people's experiences of other countries, derived almost entirely from pop culture, all sort of mashed together in a file in my head. So I had Great White North and Kids in the Hall, Alanis Morissette and Celine Dion and Leonard Cohen and Margaret Atwood and Blame Canada, and my personal favorite, LA Complex, the television show that is no longer on the air, but I loved. The invisible folder inside my head was limited, and like this speech, it was a little random. But that wasn't a bad source of knowledge overall. Kids in the Hall, for example, suggested something about a distinctive Canadian sensibility, a blend of resentment, kindness, polite British passive aggression, alcohol, and father issues. There were many facts that surprised me over the years. Clive had to tell me in detail more than once about the very fast jet plane that everyone was proud of, and also the Canadarm. I discovered yesterday that in Canada, dodgeball is called murder ball. I've been visiting Clive's family since around 2003. After 2016, everyone started to talk to us in whispers as if we were being treated for cancer. How are you? Is everything okay? And this made perfect sense to me and was honestly very nice. I've only been to Montreal once, and my main impression was that it's cold, they have excellent bagels, and the university students are slightly terrifying, having once shut down the Montreal Stock Exchange over something like what seemed to me to be a $5 rise in tuition. I've only been to Halifax once, and the weather was beautiful that day, so that's how I think it is all the time. Actually, just this Saturday night, I met an economist from Newfoundland, and I consulted the folder in my head, and I literally only had one thing there, which was Great Big Sea. But it was actually wonderful. It was enough for us to bond and sing together. Every year we go to Presqu'île Point near Brighton, Ontario, which is an idyllic place full of cottages, another term I was completely unaware of before I went to Canada. It's a place homogenous enough that I, as a fairly obvious New York Jew, was suddenly rendered exotic in a way that I've never been in any other place. And at first I chalked this up to New York Jewish paranoia, but people kept touching my hair. One day in a laundromat, an older woman asked me to do so, and because she was so enthusiastic and upbeat and a stranger, and I wanted to be nice like a Canadian, I said yes, and she did this. She literally stood in front of me and went like this. So I guess this easily could have happened in Montana, but it didn't. From an outsider perspective, I have to say it does seem like politics in Canada must be getting worse. The primary indicator of this to me is not following the news closely, but the mood of our friends that we visit, which used to be really strikingly smug and superior, but now seems mildly dismayed. It's possible, apparently, to be nostalgic for smugness. I do think it's true that, as the cliche has it, Canada thinks about the US more than vice versa, but it's much less true than it used to be, now that you're our escape route. The main and real difference that I've noticed between the two countries, which are not that different culturally, is a class one. I was raised in an upper middle class family, suburban northeastern in the US, which meant that I was comparatively spoiled for several clear reasons. I had no student debt, and I had no problems getting medical insurance. This is, of course, a default setting for young people in Canada. As far as I can tell from the outside, Scott Pilgrim is the most accurate movie. As far as I can tell from a distance, Slings and Arrows is the best TV show. Due to road trips DJ'd by Clive Thompson, I've started to love Go for Soda and even Bud the Spud. And then I'll end on this weird anecdote. One day, for some bizarre reason, the Canada Magazine Awards asked me to be a judge for one of their prizes, but they accidentally sent me the wrong packet. Not essays and criticism, but investigative journalism. I dutifully went to a local cafe in Brooklyn, and I read the entire packet, in which every story seemed to be about a different rich, corrupt family and a different lumber or maple syrup scandal in a different, obscure, and very cold region. We finally figured out what happened, and I got the correct essays, but I have been left with a lasting impression of all of Canada as an elaborate nighttime soap opera in which rich people are constantly murdering one another for oil reserves. As a television critic, this works for me.
So, good evening, y'all. I'm a Southerner. I was born in Ashland, Kentucky, now live in Chicago, and had the wonderful experience to spend 3 years in Canada. I'm Vicki Heyman.
And I'm Bruce Heyman. I'm Bruce Heyman. I belong to her.
So are you working on there?
No, this isn't working, so we'll have to share.
You can never make the crossing that she made. For such great voyages in this world do not exist anymore. But every day of your lives, the miles of that voyage between that place and this one, you cross. Every day, that journey is. Tony Kushner begins his prolific play, Angels in America, with these words from the character Rabbi Isidore Kamelwitz. He is speaking at the funeral of Sarah Ironson, a Jewish immigrant to the United States. With these words, he seeks to eulogize both Sarah and the entire generation of immigrants who struggled and fought so that their children and grandchildren could have a better life. Rabbi Kemelwitz wants the mourners to understand they carry Sarah's journey within themselves every day. This is a photograph of my great-grandmother, Taiba. And this is the Rottenberg Steamship Agency shipping ledger bearing her name and the names of her 5 children. The ledger documents their immigration to Canada through London from Belarus, secured by my great-grandfather for $31.65 in 1911. When I discovered it in the Jewish archives in Toronto, I was profoundly moved. What must her voyage have been like? A mother and her 5 children in steerage class, and the youngest, only a 6-month-old baby. What motivates someone to endure something like that? I believe it is love. Taiba's husband, my great-grandfather Sam, and their oldest, my grandfather Charles, were waiting for them. Sam and Charles had come to Canada first, seeking religious and economic opportunity, and they found it, the North American dream. In 1916, Charles left Canada, came to the US, and opened a small barber shop in Cincinnati, Ohio. Thus began my family's immigration story. Sam and Taiba were able to give their children a chance for a better life in North America. That is what their voyage was for, and that they did for love. While steamship voyages across the ocean, like the ones of my great-grandmother Taiba and Tony Kushner's Sarah Ironson, no longer exist, other voyages continue. We see it at our airports and at our southern border. Canadians see it at their border. What people are willing to do for the chance, just the chance, for a better life for their children. Human beings are amazing. What we are able to endure for love. But hate and fear can be just as powerful. And there are powerful, hateful voices in our country who do not see the faces of the tired and the poor and the huddled masses yearning to breathe free, but instead they see the immigrant, their skin color, their religion, or the circumstances of their journey as a threat, and they are unable to see that journey as their own.
When I was a child, I sat next to my grandfather, Sam, a Russian immigrant, during a play, Fiddler on the Roof. I thought perhaps this musical might be a snapshot of his world before coming to the United States. And at the end of the show, I asked him, "Grandpa, was that what it was like?" And he answered with a smile, "Yes, but I don't remember as much singing and dancing when we were there." When Sam immigrated to the United States, he left behind the most awful set of circumstances: persecution, the threat of conscription into the Russian army, an absence of hope. See, Jewish families would either flee or their parents would maim their sons so they didn't have to join the army and face an almost certain death. My grandfather fled conscription to the Russian army, and shortly after his arrival in America, he was drafted into the U.S. Army. And he turned around and went back to Europe to fight a war for his new home country. But this was no ironic tragedy. He cherished the opportunity. My grandfather knew his journey and this fight was for a better life, for the ones he loved, and a better life they truly had. His whole family came over. And in America, he put his kids through college, and they all made lives for themselves. I cherish my grandfather's World War I uniform. I wore it as a kid. I carried it with me to my swearing in as the U.S. ambassador to Canada and brought it with me to the embassy as a reminder of what he fought for, what his journey was for, and what America is and what America represents.
Our immigration stories are similar to many of yours, whether you're a Canadian or you're an American. Our parents, great-grandparents, grandparents, and beyond made huge sacrifices in hopes of achieving the North American dream of citizenship, a life of opportunity and security for their children. We are the recipients of the good fortune that came as a direct result of their struggles through poverty, illness, and war. We feel a great responsibility to pay it forward and to keep the door to immigration open. We cannot walk through that door and close it behind us. We must engage in protecting the democracies that allow people to seek freedom and opportunity. And how do we do that? We vote.
Canada and the United States are indeed neighbors and best friends. As friends and neighbors, Canadians have been there for us in our time of need, whether it be in the Iranian hostage crisis, providing comfort in the aftermath of 9/11, or with us side by side as our brothers and sisters defended our shared values across the globe. President Obama called this 5,200-mile border between our two countries the longest border of peace in the world. We share so much, and as countries, we share similar democratic values, but our bond goes deeper than that. While serving as the U.S. ambassador to Canada, it was clear there were many American citizens living in Canada, and countless Canadians told us with pride of the story of their family living in the U.S. Oftentimes, I'd be stopped by a very zealous Canadian who would tell me about their first cousins living in cities like Cleveland, Ohio, who they thought I must have known intimately. So in that sense, and in the case of Vicky's immigration and her story, we share family.
As friends and neighbors, our relationship is truly symbiotic. We are fully connected. Our air, our water, our families. If the U.S. is eliminating protections for our environment, if we continue inaction on gun violence, if we are detaining families and making our citizens more fearful, this impacts Canada as well. We want to protect the democratic values of the country that our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents sacrificed so much to attain. We want to do this by engaging all American citizens in the United States and outside of our borders to participate in the democratic process of voting.
Now, according to the United States government, the Federal Voting Assistance Program, also known as FVAP, there are about 5.5 million U.S. citizens living overseas, and just over 3 million are eligible to vote. The largest number of these U.S. citizens living abroad who are eligible to vote live in Canada. FVAP estimates the number is 675,000 eligible American voters. Get this. Get this. Less than 6% of these expats voted in the 2016 election. Let that number sink in. Less than 6%. Okay, that means 94% didn't vote. In the 2016 presidential election, the Electoral College outcome was decided by 77,000 votes across 3 Great Lakes region states, the swing states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. In Michigan, the voter margin was less than 11,000. So with such large numbers of Americans eligible to vote in Canada, expats can really make an outsized impact. So as your best friend and your neighbor, Canada, we need your help. This is a call to action to engage every eligible American citizen living in Canada to vote in the 2020 election.
If you're an American citizen,
Yeah, come on.
if you are an American citizen living outside of the United States, and if you are eligible to vote, make sure you are registered at fvap.gov and vote in the primary and the general election in 2020. To our Canadian friends and neighbors who are not American citizens, help us. Please encourage your American friends, family members to register, and most importantly, to vote. Spread the words to your American friends. Tell them about these numbers and our story and how impactful their vote can be. We know and believe it is a privilege, but most importantly, an obligation for every eligible U.S. citizen across the world, regardless of the country they live in, to participate in the democratic process that so many sacrificed so much for. Some time ago, Canada's Governor General, Julie Payette, came to Chicago to visit. We had dinner, and she talked about being an astronaut and looking back on Earth. She laid out a photo taken from space, and she asked if everyone recognized the photo, and we did. It was the Great Lakes and the Great Lakes region. She asked what we didn't see in the photograph, what we didn't recognize, what we couldn't see. We could not see borders. In many ways, we all know we are humans, and we are living in a borderless world.
But Americans don't just live within the borders of the United States. We reside all over the planet as citizens. And we have the right, and I believe the responsibility, of determining the path of our country. Just to have an opinion, just to tweet, or liking or sharing a post, no, that's not enough. Our vote is our voice. A healthy, functional democracy is dependent upon the participation of each and every one of us. We encourage Americans, wherever we are, that we should be voting. Let's not take democracy for granted.
Register and vote. We can easily do this. We must do this. Future generations of family, friends, and neighbors are depending on us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yay. Thank you very much. And I'm very sorry. We weren't trying to silence you. I promise you that. I'd like to thank all of our talkers. Rebecca Duclos, who has been a Walrus talker before, that was your grandfather, but you can read in the Walrus about her father. That one's called My Father, the Secret Pornographer. Very interesting family, Rebecca. Thank you. I can't wait to see hear your next one. Thank you, Jennifer McGrath. And, that kind of neighbor thing where if your neighbor is stressed, you are stressed. So as you know, Canadians have this kind of low-level anxiety all the time with our neighbor next door being run by, well, so thank you, Jennifer. And thank you, Clive Thompson. And I have to say there is a Canadian equivalent to y'all, but it's only in the Ottawa Valley. My cousins use. Right? Yes, I know. Not in Alberta where I grew up, but Ottawa Valley. Ursula, thank you. So you know that the former deputy mayor of New York City, Dan Doctoroff, is busy in Toronto trying to remake, with Waterfront Toronto, Sidewalk Labs, Google, Alphabet City, some controversy there around your smart city thing. But he actually came to see me last week and I said, this is tough on you. And he said, I think they just don't like New Yorkers. He actually said that to me. I said, I don't think this is personal. The privacy thing, no, I don't think it's personal. He thinks it's personal. Miss Emily, we should have brought you a butter tart. Some of us we could have just brought it on the plane. We should have brought you a butter tart. They're actually really good. And that thing where we run around the world going, yeah, he's Canadian, she's Canadian. We're always pointing out who's Canadian. Lorne Michaels, he's Canadian. But when the Ted Cruz happened, we're like, no way. We're not taking him. We're not taking him. Thank you. And thank you to the Heymans, who, as I said, we miss desperately in Ottawa, in Canada. You're all going to get a treat tonight after you have a drink with us. The Heymans have co-written this book, The Art of Diplomacy, and you're each getting one to take home tonight. If you would like to get your book while you're having a drink, the girls will get it for you, and they've offered to sign them for you if you would like that to happen, but not yet. Not yet. Right now, as I mentioned before, we're pleased to work with our friends at Concordia. We're part of their Thinking Out Loud series, and we're consistently impressed by Concordia's approach to education and the way they prepare their alumni for the real world. So to this end, and to tell you a bit more, please welcome Concordia University's interim president, vice chancellor, our friend, Graham Carr.
Thanks, Shelley. And I know that reception's just moments away, so I'll be brief. And first of all, congrats to Shelley and all the Walrus team for crossing the border in style and panache tonight. Well done. And Concordia has had a privileged relationship with the Walrus for a number of years, and we're thrilled that we could be part of this first international initiative. Et pour toutes et tous qui sont ici ce soir, merci d'être venus. C'est formidable de vous voir. It's great to see a number of Concordia alumni. And the Concordia alumni who are here are now part of a family of about 225,000 alumni around the world. But I also know there are a lot of people in the room who don't know very much about us. So let me take a minute just to tell you something about the university we are. This past August, we celebrated our 45th anniversary, so I guess if the Walrus is a startup in the world of literary journalism, we're a startup in the world of global higher education. But we're also very proud of the fact that for the last 4 years, Times Higher Education and the QS rankings in London have slotted us as the top Canadian university less than 50 years old, and for the last 2 years, as the top university in North America that's under 50. We're ambitious to be, and we believe we are on the way to being known as Canada's next generation university. We've developed world quality research in a number of cutting edge fields, and you've been exposed to a little bit of that tonight, whether it's smart, sustainable cities and communities, whether it's public health, cybersecurity, synthetic biology. We have the dean with us this evening, the top art and design school in Canada and one of the top 100 ranked in the world. The Economist magazine consistently puts our MBA and executive MBA program in the top 100 in the world. And we're also extremely pleased that we are the first university in North America to have a faculty of engineering and computer science named for a woman. Gina Cody, an Iranian immigrant who came to Canada, became the first woman to get a PhD in engineering from our university and went on to be very successful in the building world. And I think that Gina Cody School is a beacon for the open, accessible excellence that we're trying to offer at Concordia. Today, we have more than 50,000 students, and if I can do my own little riff on the theme of neighborliness, I would point out that a big part of our success as a young university, as a next generation university, is the incredible diversity of our student population. We also believe that a big part of our success is that we're a strong anchor institution in the city of Montreal, that we're an important institution in the province of Quebec. We draw about 70% of our students from all over Quebec. But we also have more than 20% of our students who are international. We have students from over 150 countries at Concordia now. 25% de nos étudiants parlent français comme la langue maternelle. 25% of our students speak French as a first language. But equally significant is the fact that more than 30% of our students speak a language other than English or French as their first language. And we believe that that diversity is part of what makes us an innovative university. By putting people together coming from different cultures and backgrounds, by inviting them to work together and learn together, you get different solutions from the kinds of solutions you get with a smart but homogeneous group. And we're trying to promote that diversity at every turn. Ursula referred to it earlier when she was talking about her research group. I think at the university, we've been promoting disciplinary neighborliness for a long period of time. We've been transdisciplinary before the word was even coined. And we want our students to have a global experience. We bucked the trend last year when we became one of the few North American universities that actually sends more students outbound for semester abroad experiences than we recruit inbound. And we get a lot of international students coming to do their full studies here, but we're also equally proud of the fact that we're sending more and more students abroad. And I point this out because I think part of being good neighbors, whether it's the friendship between Canada and the United States, is learning about each other and learning about difference and learning about your own identity as a result of seeing that difference face to face. And I think that we create an environment at the university which offers students and faculty the opportunity to discover new neighbors and to learn how to be neighbors differently in the global world of the 21st century. So merci encore une fois d'être venu ce soir. It's really a thrill, again, to have the opportunity to partner with the Walrus. It's terrific that all of you are here, and enjoy the reception, which is coming.
Nobody move. Thank you, Graham. In the spirit of transparency, I have 5 things to share with you. Number 1, if you would like to support these conversations and more while you're out there tonight, please consider subscribing to the Walrus. You can have it delivered to your home wherever you live. $35 tonight for a full year. Fake news is really cheap to make. Fact-based journalism is very expensive. So your support as a reader and a donor and a subscriber matters a great deal. Number 2, as I said, we've now produced over 100 Walrus Talks. That means there are now more than 700 Walrus Talkers, most 7 minutes long. You can watch them wherever and whenever you want for free on our YouTube channel called Walrus Television. 3, a very large thank you to Consul General Phyllis Yaffe and everyone at the Consulate of Canada in New York for having us tonight. Thank you to Graham Carr, Joanne Pelche, Philip Beauregard, and everyone at Concordia. Thank you to our national partners, Inspire, Labatt, Air Canada, and Shaw. They go with us everywhere we go. And thank you to Fulbright for your partnership in tonight's event. 4, books. I've already told you you're going to get your book. I told you that. You're also going to get a magazine. We are coming back to New York on Wednesday, April 22nd, with our partners at CFAR, which is the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research. I think Catherine Riedel is here tonight. There's Catherine from CFAR. They will be joining us, and we will be, I think, not here, maybe here, not sure about the location yet. But if you leave your email address out there, we can invite you directly. Those of you who were invited by somebody else to be here tonight, we can't find you. So please give the Walrus out there your email addresses. At this moment, front row. You guys wait a minute. Front row is going. Say goodbye. Thank you, talkers. You'll see them at the reception. The reason we do that is so you don't trap them in their seat in the front row and they can never move. So do please join us at the reception. You'll exit through those doors. There is food, there is drink, and if you are there, there will be wonderful conversation. You can meet the Walrus team, MA, Andrea, Tina, and Blair. And one last thing, we are not actually the Walrus. Remember, you are actually the Walrus. Thank you for coming.